Hey, Clem.
Hi, Jenn.
What are you listening to this week? Welcome to season 4 of What Are You Listening To? The weekly podcast created to foster community through music by sharing the stories behind the songs that soundtrack our lives. Some of the songs are old, some new, all good. I'm Jenn Tully, and this week I'm joined by Clem Moss. Clem is the founder and drummer of my new favorite, all-female Led Zeppelin tribute band, Zepparella, and author of the book From Bonham to Buddha and Back, The Slow Enlightenment of the Hard Rock Drummer, which uses her music career as metaphor for contemplative practice. This week, Clem and I are going to get to know each other through 4 songs. 2 are her picks and 2 are mine. For the best listening experience, I recommend tuning into the show on Spotify. There, you can hear the show with the songs we discuss incorporated. You can also find the show on Apple, Amazon Music, or wherever you stream. But if you're not listening on Spotify, be sure to give the playlist a listen and then tune into our conversation. With that, let's get started. Clem, what are you listening to this week?
Hi, Jenn. Thanks for having me. Well, you caught me. I feel like every week I could listen to something, it could be so markedly different.
Right?
But this week I was in the recording studio recording some original music. And so I was in songwriting mode. So the first song that I chose is Nobody's Baby by Nick Cave. And the second song I chose is from Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, one of my very favorite albums by Elton John. And I just picked Funeral for a Friend and Love Lives Bleeding because I have some really neat history with those 2 tracks.
I cannot wait to get into these and I'm glad you said that about like you were in songwriting mode this week, because when I saw your 2 picks, I'm like, oh, okay, we're gonna get into some singer-songwriter stuff here. I'm so
That's right.
excited about this. And I was so surprised too that I had not had any Nick Cave on the show before, which is like shocking to me. And I think the interesting part about that is I've been listening to a lot of Jason Isbell lately, and I
Mhm.
think like second to Nick Cave, he's like captures stories and lyrics and spins a yarn in the same way to me. And so it
Yeah.
was so fun for me to kind of pause on Jason Isbell for a second and go back and revisit Nick Cave, because I forgot how much I love Nick Cave, and especially this album that this song is on, the Let Love In album from 1994. Love. I mean, and Nick Cave is prolific, right? He's been making music for 4 decades and something like
Yeah.
almost 20 studio albums. I think he's got like 16 or 17. He's a screenwriter, a novelist, an actor. I mean, he's one of those people where I always say, like, maybe you don't love him, maybe you don't love his voice, but you've got to respect the talent, right? Like he's just
Yeah.
amazing. So tell me
Right.
about like how this song found you, or how you found it, or why this particular Nick Cave song. He has so many that are brilliant. Why this one?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because I was when I knew I was coming on the show and I was looking at my music, right?
Yeah.
Like, what do I listen to, and how do I mean? Right now, I'm listening to Barbara Streisand's, 47-hour audiobook. So,
Yes.
like, you're right. So, so I was thinking about, what do I listen to musically? And I realized something about myself, which I've kind of known. And I think I've always been a little embarrassed by it, but now I see it as a great gift, which is that I've always had my music curated for me. And I see this because when I was growing up, my father was an avid music lover, and he always had the best stereo, and it was like 8 a.m. weekend mornings. The stereo blasted all day long, right?
Yes.
His favorite was the Stones, but he also loved the band, John Lee Hooker, the Beatles, Leonard Skinner. Like he really loved like Southern rock, blues rock, and that kind of stuff. And so that really, I mean, that was the music I listened to until I was probably, I mean, I'm still listening to it now, but when I got to be about 16, I started to to have music that was all mine. Led Zeppelin was the first band that was kind of mine, because it was a little hard for my dad. He didn't really relate to it. So that was like my music. But that idea of being curated for it, it set up this pattern in my life where I was looking at my college boyfriend. He was an avid music lover, and he introduced me to punk rock.
Yes.
And then my next really long term boyfriend was a recording engineer, and I we were going out before I was even a drummer, and his passion for like different music, and he really, I had loved Bob Dylan in the band, but he really turned me on to like early Bob Dylan and all of that kind of music, as long with like the Replacements and a lot of the
Yes.
music that was happening at the time. And then now my husband of the last 22 years, he is, he's a musician and a music manager. And he has been playing music since he was, 13, 14 years old. He's been a promoter. He's owned a record, managed a record store. He's been on every level of music. And he has this encyclopedic knowledge of music. And he's an avid music collector. We have so many albums that we had to build, stuff in our living room and had to measure the albums. And now it's overflowing, right? Like we have so many albums. And I'm so lucky because I get this curation, where I don't have to go and seek out music, right? And so, like I said, I've always kind of been embarrassed. Like I'm a musician, like I should be one of those guys who like knows everybody who played on a record. That's not my mind. Like I've just never,
Yeah.
music to me is, I'm so passionate about it, but I'm so like, I have such a varied taste. Right. So anyway, I wanted to get that kind of out of the way before we even launched into Nick.
No, I love it because I think that that comes up a lot on the show. That's part of the goal here is, like I said, to get to know people through the songs that they find. And you do discover really quickly, like your dad and my dad sound really similar. That's how I experienced music too. We'll talk a little bit later in the show that another sort of embarrassing thing for me is that not only was music curated for me by my parents and people around me, but I'm also just a lover of pop culture. So that also includes like movies and TV shows and things like that. And that was another big source of music for me, that was
Yeah.
kind of like frowned upon, right? Like, oh, soundtracks aren't really music, then like that's a
Right.
nice segue into a Nick Cave conversation, right? I think he would disagree, given that
That's
he's
right.
scored, some of the greatest movies of all time and like shows of recent, he scored the Jeffrey Dahmer series. He scored Blonde. He scored Wind River. I mean, same thing. I think that I think that the way we sort of used to look at soundtracks as a way of discovering music has kind of gone by the wayside. But I'm glad that we're being real and honest here about how
That's
how
right.
how music found us, despite the fact that we're both like super fans, because I think it can come to you anyway. Like that's my wish for everyone. Like you can find music however you want, whatever kind of music speaks to you, but just like find it, right? It
Yeah.
opens up like a whole new like door in your soul, I think, when you find the music that speaks to you.
That's right. That's right. And I have that secret music that I don't know that anybody around me really loves the way that I do, and then it's kind of mine. Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And, talking about Barbara Streisand, like she's one of those people that I just adore. And I've never had a friend who adored her the way that I do. Right. So, yeah. And, that, which is a great segue into Nick Cave, because Barbara, when she's talking about picking a song and choosing a song, she saw herself as an actress first and a singer second.
Hmm.
And so every song that she chose was, she got into the character of the
Yeah.
song, right?
Yep.
Now that's a very kind of showbiz way to see it, rather than, a lot of singers these days would say that they're singing their story, right? Like
Right.
singer songwriters, which is another way to do it. But for her, she's stepping into a character. And I think Nick does that really successfully.
Yeah.
And and the great ones like Nick and like Barbara, what they're able to do is able to step into a character but tell a story that feels so connected to their own soul that we totally believe it. Tom Waits is someone who does that as well.
I was
Where
just gonna say that. Yep.
yeah, the character is not, he's not the character, and yet whatever that emotion is, he manages to tap into himself and create it to be a universal story, which I think is really what Nick Cave does in Nobody's Baby. It feels very personal
It
in
does.
this story, but it really is a universal story of the way that we look back at the the mistakes made in relationships, when a relationship is over, and how it's beyond us, in a lot of ways.
So true. And I love the way that you said that too, because I think that's like the song almost feels like it's like from the beyond, right? Like his voice is so chilling and it's such a sad song. A lot of times we talk about, a song sounds really happy and then you listen to the lyrics and you're like, oh, ouch.
Yeah,
That's not, this is one where like the lyrics and the song, like the tone matches perfectly, I feel like. And it's blunt and poetic all at the same time. And I think that's what I love about Nick Cave is just he just always delivers on that front. He's consistently good at giving you like this
yeah,
blunt statement in like this really beautiful poetic way. Even there's a line in this song that says, but there are some things love won't allow. I held her hand, but I don't hold it now.
yeah.
Like, so basic, right? But, like, even reading it, I feel it, like, in my gut. I feel it in my heart. Like, I feel those lyrics in such a really, like, profound, real way, and I think that that's such a gift, like, almost a superpower that somebody can
It
take
is.
something
Yeah.
so simple, a sentiment that we've all felt before, and then just phrase it in a way that sums it up perfectly and beautifully and painfully, like, all in one, like, fail swoop there.
Totally, yeah, and, in looking, I was thinking about this while I was in the studio working on my own songs, my own songwriting, trying to figure out, how a song can really, just become something, that you're envisioning in your mind when you're writing the song, and just looking at the structure of the song. And I've always loved songs that start off with big concepts and then bring it down to the personal. And that's what he does at the beginning of this, when he's like, I've read through all of this, all of this information, all of this wisdom, that, the world has to offer. And yet I still can't figure out why I couldn't keep this relationship. Right. And,
Yep.
um, and, and that's a really beautiful sentiment as well. Like the knowledge that we have sometimes isn't enough, emotional, to help us through these emotional situations. And that was one thing that really, I just love the way the song starts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then I feel like that's again a great jumping off point into your second pick, which is Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding by Elton John, as you mentioned.
Yes.
Um,
Last night at the end of our recording session, our 2-day recording session, I record with my dear friend who I've recorded with now for almost 25 years, Robert Preston at Get Real Studios here in San Francisco. And we have a tradition at the end of our recording time. At that last night, we always crank something up and both stand on opposite sides of the studio and like sing out loud, really loud at
I
the
love
song.
that.
And last night it was Yellow Brick Road, which is why I kind of at the last minute I was like, I'm changing my song. I want to do Yellow Brick Road.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was thinking about Funeral for a Friend. So Funeral for a Friend, it doesn't have lyrics, and yet
Right.
when I remember being in seventh grade, we were supposed to take a song and write words to it, right? It wasn't like a songwriting class, it was in literature. It was kind of opening us to the poetry, I guess, idea.
Yeah.
And I used that Funeral for a Friend because it's just so evocative. Like at one point, I imagine this graveyard and like the moon coming up. And as soon as the moon comes up at midnight, like all of the spirits start getting out of the graves, and you can hear the little castanets in there. And I'm like, the skeletons are dancing and all of this stuff. So I've always really loved that song because it's an example of how music can paint pictures.
For
right?
sure. And I think,
Yeah.
Elton John is great at that and has been for a really long time. And this
Mm.
song, if you're, I think a lot of people have listened to the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road album, but I feel like this is a song that doesn't get as much love as it should. Like when I saw
Mhm.
this pop up on your list, I'm like, oh, and there are so many Elton John. We talk about this a lot too on the show that, for really prolific artists, they might have I don't know, if you're lucky, 5 or 10 songs that get radio airplay, and the rest of their catalog is just sort of like deep tracks, like
Yeah.
it's considered just frivolous, I guess. And so it's always amazes me. Like I'm always happy when somebody brings a great song from a great artist, from a great album that's a lesser known cut from that album. And
Right.
I think like this song is one of my favorites off of that album. It's truly like an 11-minute masterpiece. It starts off with
Totally.
this like funky instrumental for the first almost 6 minutes. And you get like you were saying, this weird, almost like ELO style synth. And then you get like
Uh-huh.
all the drama of like a Meatloaf song, it's like,
Uh-huh.
and then Elton John comes in with the piano and you're like, oh, that's right. I'm definitely listening to Elton John. So I think that the song just has everything. Like it's got a sad story, but a happy sort of beat behind it. It's great musically. I love the arrangement. I just think that the song is one of his best. I always this one and let's see, my father's gun from what's is that from the Tumbleweed Crossing album, I
Oh,
think.
yeah, right,
That's
right.
another of his songs that I love that I feel like, just doesn't because it's not one of his radio airplay songs. A lot of people don't know it. So this song was in that category for me and I was
Oh,
so
cool.
happy to have it. And again, always looking back on these songs, like this is from 1973. Like that blows my mind that
I know.
you can listen now and it sounds like it could
It
be
sounds
just it's
precious.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just as fresh, right? Like
Yeah,
I
that's right.
I think that's unbelievable. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. I just don't know how you
Yeah.
do that.
The 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 connection between Elton and Bernie,
Yeah.
just being somebody who, is, I'm a lyricist, right? And I create, when I create music, I kind of start from drums, hear words and drum beats, and then kind of, get people to come in to help me with, the musical aspect of it. I'll put like a really basic chord progression throughout the song and then have somebody come in to kind of flesh it out, right? Who really knows music. And that kind of collaboration, I feel like it's always been a dream of mine, and I've been fortunate in my life to have collaborators like that on all of my solo records, where we're able to collaborate in that way. And yeah, it's I was thinking that, being in with a great friend and collaborator of mine, Robert, as we're working on writing songs, and trying to, it's like a puzzle piece, to write a song together. And so I I that relationship, when I found that out, I think when I was a very young kid, that Elton John was writing the music and Bernie was writing the words,
Yep.
it turned on light bulbs for me, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like two of the greatest collaborators of all time, I
Yeah.
think that it's like again, what a magical pair and again, also so glad that those two found one another. When you think
Yeah.
about it like cosmically and in the universe, like thank goodness. Like
Right.
what if those
Yeah.
two had just like continued to pass each other, that fateful day at the recording studio, like and
Yeah.
they never did sit down and try and write together. Like I just think of all the amazing songs that we would not have. I can't even think of it. I don't even want to think about it. But I'm glad too that that's becoming more like acceptable that people are collaborating and doing these things together. And an artist that likes a certain band can pull members from that band in and collaborate with them and work together. And I'm so happy that we're seeing a lot more of that crossover because I think we're getting a lot deeper, richer songs from artists that we've liked that are, sort of a two heads are better than one situation where they've pulled somebody else in that's really genius as well and put something
Mhm.
together that's just double mind blowing. So I
Yeah, I
do
think
love that too.
all music has an element of collaboration, ultimately. Even for a singer-songwriter, I mean, they're going to need somebody to to help them kind of record it, or to, I mean, there are those rare people. Honestly, I don't know that there's anybody who can do it all by themselves,
Right. Or that you'd want to even,
yeah,
I feel
yeah,
like that's also like the
yeah,
collaboration and the joy that comes from that is
yeah.
part of the magic.
That's right. And ultimately, the big collaboration is you and the audience, and
Yeah.
somebody has a acoustic guitar and they stand up in front of the audience is going to tell them which songs are working and which songs aren't, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true, and it feels like, I'm always happy to be part of that collective in the
Yeah.
audience.
Yeah, that's right. That's
That
right.
feels like a gift always.
That's right.
Well, my stories are similar to yours, shockingly, at least in terms of this first pick here and how I came to find it. So, my first song is a song called "A Million Miles Away" by a band called the Plimsouls. So, the Plimsouls are one of those bands that I discovered early, and like we were talking about, were my own. They weren't something that somebody else had introduced me to, or something that I had listened to from my parents or heard in the car. This was from the first time I heard them was from an amazing '80s movie that I will always love called Valley Girl. We talk about it
Yeah.
on the show a lot. Um, and from there, I just like went off the rails on the Plimsouls. And that was before, when I first heard them was before Spotify, before streaming, like obviously all of the things. So I was in record stores, I was looking for liner notes. I was, trying to find out as much as I could from talking with the people that worked in the record stores and all those kinds of things to figure out everything that I could about the Plimsouls and Peter Case and all of the things. And then when I moved to Los Angeles in 1995, one of the very first things I did before we even like moved into our apartment and unpacked the car was I saw a flyer for the Plimsouls playing at this old venue in Santa Monica. It's not there anymore. It was called McCabe's Guitar Shop, and it was literally a guitar shop. And then in the back there was a stage, and we like drove our car packed full of everything straight to McCabe's Guitar Shop. Like
That's
stepped out and saw a Plimsouls show. So it really was one of those full circle moments for me of like, this was a band that I discovered that I liked from a movie that maybe in some subtle way or not so subtle way was part of the reason that I was always attracted to LA and wanted to go there
uh-huh.
and wanted to be there. And so to see them like very first, like stepping out of my car into Los Angeles and into a Plimsoll show felt really like a full circle moment for me. And there's nothing like deep necessarily about this song or amazing. I love Peter Case's voice. I love the guitar. I love the drums in this song. It's just like a good rocking love song, and I've always liked it. It's whenever I'm feeling like discombobulated or lost or I don't know what to do or I don't know what I want to listen to. Like that's always like a true north for me, right? I can always go back to the Plimsouls and especially that Everywhere at Once album and just feel like I immediately like know where I'm supposed to be.
I love that story. I love that you just were like, no, we're going, like, and
Yeah.
then drove over to it. When I was listening to, so I know this song so well because, in 1981, I was in, 11th grade or 10th and 11th grade, right? So it
Yeah.
was everywhere. This song
Yeah.
was everywhere, especially once the movie came out, it was everywhere, especially in Southern California. It was
I
everywhere,
bet.
right? And I always loved it. And when I hear it, it brings me into that, it's funny, like music, it'll bring me into like almost an atmosphere,
Yes.
of like rooms that I was in or the way the light looked then, or, it's almost a visual feeling that kind of rises like a smell does, where you smell
Yep.
something and you're kind of transported. That's what this is like for me. And when I was listening to it this morning, I was like, I really, his voice is awesome. You're
It
right. He has
is.
a really great voice. Yeah.
It is. And
Yeah.
I
And
wish
it's
I could have
great
found the
song.
original version of the song. They only had these live versions, which again, I was like, well, that fits because of the
That's funny.
story,
Yeah.
But yeah, you can't find that album on Spotify.
I'm trying to
That
think too about was there a video?
I
There
think that
must have
there
been
was.
because,
Yeah.
MTV, like I think it was around 81 that
Yeah,
MTV kind of
it
came. I
was.
remember specifically being like I was the editor of the school newspaper and laying out the school newspaper, and I would do it at the local newspaper place, printing place, and I remember looking up at the TV, and it was the first time I saw MTV. Now, what
Yes.
people don't talk about with MTV is that, before that there was so much cable television, and there were
Yeah.
all of these little video shows.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like I'd never seen music videos before, right? But this was like, it seemed like, it was a bigger thing than these local
Yeah.
access, two guys on a couch playing video kind of things.
Well, and they had more
Yeah.
time. It was like all day long. Like I still
Right.
remember the first video I saw on MTV too. It was Freeze Frame by the J.
Mm-hmm.
Giles Band,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
They played that all the time, didn't they?
All the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
heavy rotation.
Yeah.
And I think, too, like that was such a, like when you talk about atmosphere, like that was such an atmosphere. Like anybody's friend, like any friend's house that you went to from the time sort of MTV launched until they stopped playing music
Right.
and started only playing reality shows,
Right.
that it was on, right? It was background everywhere
Yeah.
you went. Anybody's house you went to, MTV was on in the background, whether
right.
it was Headbangers Ball or, whatever, like Friday night videos, like everybody was like watching these, like universally watching for these new videos to come out that went with their favorite songs. So it definitely was like
Yeah. It
an
was kind of cool
atmosphere.
too. Yeah, at the beginning, that I think what they were doing was they were going around to all of the little stations and like finding out what they were playing on those little stations. So you saw
Yeah.
things like what was that band, the Residents. There were like
Oh,
Residents videos, which the
yeah.
Residents were never got, I don't think they were ever
Huge.
charted or anything. They
Right.
didn't have any chart songs, but they made videos, and so
Yeah.
the videos were on MTV, right?
Yeah.
And
It
then I
was a
remember
cool
pretty
time.
quick it kind of, it started narrowing, yeah, but at the
It
beginning it
did.
was fun. Yeah.
It was. It was a good time. Early
Yeah.
days of MTV. Good
That's
times.
right. That's right.
Well, I'm rounding out our playlist with another like super personal song that kind of helped me again on my journey to Los Angeles. I don't know if it was your California vibes coming
Mm.
through to me, Clem, that like really sent me back to the LA days. But my second pick is a song called "Spin the Bottle" by the Juliana Hatfield Three. So this is one of those albums too that like just kind of spun me around the first time that I heard it. It came out in 1993. It's off the album Become What You Are. And this was a time when women were really starting to do some like awesome rock musician things that were different than what I'd heard them do in the past. Of course, like, I'm not saying that Heart didn't exist or like these really fabulous or like Joni Mitchell, like singer songwriter or rocker, talented musicians, female musicians. But this early 90s time frame was such a cool, interesting space for music because I think it was the first time for me that I remember female rockers kind of coming out and making fun of the whole thing, right? Like making fun of the way women had traditionally been portrayed in song or,
Mhm.
what a female rock star had to be. And this was when like, Sheryl Crow was kind of breaking, Liz Phair was coming out, the Breeders, like you had just these really powerful, strong female voices. And this was a song that felt accessible, like I could get into it, but I still really appreciated the story. It's like, it's about stupid shit we do as kids, but
Yeah.
it still felt empowering to me. It felt like she was still in the driver's seat, even though they're playing this dumb game that, was traditionally encouraged by the boys so that they could kiss the girls, and I
Right.
just love that she took ownership of it. And then, like I said, when I got to Los Angeles, which was 2 years later in 1995, it was almost like it was like advice from my big sister about dating in Los Angeles, right? Like I felt like, oh, look at how like predictive of everything this song was. Like, yeah. And I always loved the line where she says he's in a bunch of movies, really stupid movies. It's not entirely his fault. He can't control it all. Where you're just like, nah. And it did. It reminded me of like every, hot actor dudes are a dime a dozen in Los Angeles, right? But when you're 22 and living the dream, you're like, okay, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I didn't know this song. Yeah, so it was really
Okay.
fun to listen to it. Yeah, yeah.
She's really great. You know, I've always loved her voice, and then she's worked with some of my favorite people. She's worked with
Mhm.
Matthew Cause of Not a Surf. They had a side project called Minor Alps. We mentioned the Replacements earlier. Everybody that's listened to the show knows I'm a huge Replacements fan. She worked with Paul Westerberg, and they were called the I Don't Cares. She was in the Lemonheads with Evan Dando. So she's one of those people. She's kind of like an Amy Mann a little
Yeah.
bit, right? Like
Mhm.
people
Right.
know her, but not really all that much. Or you hear a song and you're like, oh, okay, that's Juliana Hatfield. So I
Right.
was happy to bring a song of hers to the show because I really think she's one of those artists that's kind of underrated. And also, I'll shout this out as well because she has a great cover of a really amazing Elliott Smith song called Needle in the Hay.
Ah.
And her cover version of that is actually really, really good. And it's hard to, I would imagine it's hard to cover Elliott Smith.
Yeah, definitely. She also seems like someone who, when you don't have a specific genre necessarily, like she seems so versatile, I
Yeah,
think then it's almost as if your name gets like spread over a lot of places, but it doesn't stand out, right?
right.
But I don't think that's a bad thing because she has such an active career, and the people who really
Yeah.
know her. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think she's like an artist too,
right.
like people
Yeah,
kind of seek her out. And so that's my little plug for Juliana Hatfield. If you're not familiar, definitely get in there and dig deep on some of her music because she does. She's got a great catalog. She's collaborated, like I said, with a lot of great people, and it's just fun. I'm sure there's something in there that everybody will like.
yeah,
Even if it's not Spin the Bottle, there's something else that you'll like.
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Well,
Yeah.
Clem, thank you so much for sharing what you're listening to this week. And listeners, to learn more about Clem, you can visit her website at clemthegreat.com. That's CLEMTHEGREAT.com. There you'll find book purchase links. You'll get the lowdown on her band and music and more information about her spiritual counseling practice. And I feel like we're going to have you back on, Clem, because we didn't even get to talk about the book. I was so interested in the stories of your songs. So I
Yeah.
think that you may have to make a second appearance here in season 4 so we can dig a little bit deeper. Maybe once you get some of your original music finished that you're working on right now, you'll come back and share it with us.
Oh, thank you. I would love it. Thank you so much, Jen.
Yay, this was so great. Thank you so much for joining me, Clem. And as always, listeners, please be sure to follow, download, and share the show. And if you love listening, drop us a review. Last but not least, to stay informed on all things Super Awesome Mix and what are you listening to, be sure to follow us on Instagram at Super Awesome Mix. Thanks for listening, and please join me again next week to find your new favorite song.